Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies 2016 Distinguished Alumni Lecture. My name is Ann Hayner. I'm Associate Director for Alumni Relations at the Kroc Institute. And I have the honor of welcoming you on behalf of Ruth Abbey, our director, and others at the Kroc Institute to one of our favorite events of the year. At the Kroc Institute, we're constantly aware that the accomplishments and fascinating career paths of our alumni are one of the chief sources of our pride. Since 1987, when the first 4 students were awarded a concentration in peace studies as undergraduates, the Kroc Institute has graduated over 1,500 alumni. This includes now over 950 from the undergraduate major or minor in peace studies, and over 560 alumni from the MA program, with 3 more from now our doctoral program in peace studies. Now at work in 68 countries around the world, Kroc alumni have found a variety of ways to integrate peace studies into their professional work over the last 3 decades. Some identify as professional peace builders, while others have found ways to incorporate the knowledge and the values of peace studies in a variety of distinct professions, from religious leadership to teaching to parenting. The Kroc Institute's Distinguished Alumni Award honors graduates of Notre Dame's Peace Studies program whose lives and careers exemplify the ideals of international peace building. Previous award winners have included, just an excerpt of several, Juana Popa, Ambassador of Romania to Croatia, George Washira, Director of the Nairobi Peace Initiative, Shabi Aguirre, Senior Analyst in the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Molly Kinder, an expert in international development and the fight against poverty and malnutrition, Rosette Musigo Morrison, the longest-serving legal officer with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and Adriana Quinones, coordinator of the Latin America and Caribbean Office of UN Women. To this list of distinguished alumni, we are now privileged to add Karsonya Whitehead. Karsonya describes herself as a historian, writer, public speaker, and activist who works in the Black documentary tradition. An associate professor of communication and African American studies at Loyola University, Maryland, she investigates the ways in which race, class, and gender coalesce in American classrooms, political environments, and social arenas. In recent years, she has become a frequent analyst and advocate on race relations and the Black Lives Matter movement in lectures, radio commentary, blog posts, and op-eds. Next Monday, she will make her 4th appearance on the White House's Black History Month panel. And on Saturday, will give the Black History Month lecture in Washington, D.C. She has developed curricula for high schools and colleges, most recently launching the Say Her Name syllabus, a Twitter hashtag designed to collect resources about Black women whose lives made a difference, but who are often forgotten by history. A native of Washington, D.C., Karsonya received her BA from Lincoln University and her MA from the Kroc Institute in 1993. She earned a PhD in language, literacy, and culture from the University of Maryland in 2009, in, I might add, a mere 2.5 years from start to finish. You might notice a small gap between 1993 and 2009, between that MA and the PhD. During that time, she actually developed expertise in several other professions. She's a 3-time New York Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker with 10 years of experience in contexts ranging from MTV to PBS. Her film, Twin Towers, A History, is broadcast on PBS every year on 9/11. She also taught middle school social studies in Baltimore for 4 years, where she was named Maryland History Teacher of the Year in 2006. Karsonya is the author of 3 books so far: Sparking the Genius, the Carter Woodson Lecture, 2013, Notes from a Colored Girl, the Civil War Pocket Diaries of Emily Francis Davis, and Letters to My Black Sons, Raising Boys in a Post-Racial America. She's also co-edited a set of lessons plans for teaching Emily Francis Davis. 2 more books of hers are due out this year. Her first book of poetry, Race Brave, later this month, and the Emancipation Proclamation, Race Relations on the Eve of Reconstruction in the fall. Karsonya says that all of this work is really her contribution to breaking down the walls of racism, classism, and sexism. We are honored that the Kroc Institute and Notre Dame can claim a part of Karsonia's important work. I'd like to ask Karsonya to join me on the stage to address the topic From the Civil Rights Movement to Black Lives Matter, My Life as a Peace Activist. Want to come up? The Kroc Institute is proud to recognize you, Karsonya, for your commitment to human rights and your dedication to teaching, marching, and strategizing for a more peaceful and just world, and to confer on you the Distinguished Alumni Award of the Kroc Institute. As inscribed on the base of the award, we're confident you will go forth with peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I first would like to thank the Kroc Institute and, of course, Ann Hayner. One of the dreams I had many years ago when I first saw that they were honoring alumni with a distinguished award, I wanted to win the award. I said, one day I'm going to win the award. And I've been asking myself all night long, what took them so long to call, right? I've been waiting for quite a while. So it is indeed an honor and a pleasure. I speak about these issues all over the country, and I must add that this is the place that means the most to me. This is what I call my holy ground. This is where I took off my shoes and recognized who I wanted to be as a peace scholar. And I thank the Kroc Institute for all of their wisdom and all of their knowledge and taking the time to pour that into me. So I really do appreciate this. I would like to start by reading a poem called Songs in a Key Called Baltimore, to talk about this notion of from the civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter, my life as a peace activist. I then would like to show a short video about Black Lives Matter and then really get into the discussion I have about how I've grown along the way. I would like to write a song about peace, about reconciliation, about a city coming back together and working for the common good. I would like to proclaim that Black Lives Matter and then point to the ways in which this simple concept, screamed and shouted, cried over and prayed about, has transformed the city and altered our space. I would like to teach my sons about peace, even though I'm raising them in a city where peace has never been the norm, where peace has never been taught on the playground, nor practiced in the school, nor modeled on the street corner. I try and hide my frustration because in the aftermath of the Baltimore uprising, a time when black people and white people named their pain, life has settled back down to the familiar. To a time where black bodies are once again endangered and black life is once again criminalized and black spaces exist once again only on the edges of both the city and our minds. I am not old enough to remember life before Brown when black and white spaces were equally marked, but I suspect that it was not much different than it is now in places around Baltimore and places around America where the crime of breathing while black is still punishable by death. My heart always skips a beat when a cop's car is behind me while I am driving at night. And though my sons are not old enough to drive, I am already frightened, concerned, angry, and frustrated by the day when they are stopped for the crime of driving while black. There are days when being black in America overwhelms me and makes me want to spend the day in bed, and times when being the black mother of black boys in Baltimore City makes me wish I had enough money to move them somewhere where I could keep them safe. Safe from them, the ones who see their lives as expendable and unnecessary, and safe from us, those that look at them without realizing they are mirrors that simply reflect all of who they are supposed to be. I often think about slavery and how different life was when you could see the hand that held the chain that was attached to the ball that was tied to your ankle. We come from a people who experienced this daily and still chose to survive. Survival is our legacy. And since we survived the Middle Passage as involuntary passengers on a trip that sealed our fate, and we survived slavery and whips and lashes by learning how to give way and stay small, and we survived the Civil War by claiming freedom at the hands of those who looked like our oppressors, and we survived Jim Crow by teaching our children the unwritten rules that were marked by our blood, and we survived black mayors who moved from our communities and took a piece of our spirit but left their humanity behind. We will survive this. And though there are times when we are like strangers in a foreign land, we look around and we wonder how we got here. We take stock and we realize how little we actually have. We wonder how long we will continue to suffer and die at the hands of both the oppressor and of the oppressed. And despite all of this, black people survive anyway. There are days when I look at my sons and my heart swells with pride, and I think about all they used to be and all that they can become, and then I stop and I catch my breath. I clutch my breath and I pull my pearls, and I stop and I shake my hands and I blink back tears because I am the mother of 2 black boys being raised in a post-racial world, where cries for justice for Freddie and for Tyrone West, and for Rakia Boyd, and for Sandra Bland, and for Ayanna Jones, and for Tamir Rice still get swallowed up and suppressed. There are nights when I stand in the doorway of their room, not to wake them up for the revolution, but simply to remind myself that just for a moment, that they are still there and they are still with me. All I want is what every other mother wants around this city: the simple comfort of knowing that my sons' lives do matter. And to those who look like them and those who don't, for them to know that my work to pour love and light and hope and truth into my boys will not be in vain. And with this very simple truth, as my songs of peace get lost in my never-ending cries for justice, I know we will survive. We will rebuild. We will move on. Survival is our legacy, and surviving every day in this racist and unjust system is our goal.
Two-thirds a person, rapings and beatings and suffering that worsens. Black human packages tied up in strings. Black rage can come from all these kinds of things. Black rage is founded on blatant denial, squeezed economics, subsistence survival, deafening silence and social control. Black rage is founded on wounds in the soul. When the dogs bite, when the beatings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember all these kinds of things, and then I don't fear so bad. Black rage is founded, who fed us self-hatred, lies and abuse, while we waited and waited. Spiritual treason, this grid and its cages. Black rage is founded on these kinds of things. Black rage is founded on training and training, threatening your freedom to stop you complaining, poisoning your water while they say it's raining. Are you mad for complaining, complaining? Old-time bureaucracy drugging the youth. Black rage is founded on blocking the truth, murder and crime, compromise and distortion. Sacrifice, sacrifice, who makes this fortune? Greed falsely called progress, such human contortion. Black rage is founded on these kinds of things. When the dogs bite, when the beatings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember all these kinds of things, and then I don't fear so bad. Victims of violence, folks like me and body. Life out of context is living ungodly. Politics, greed falsely called wealth. Like wages founded on denial of self. The dog fight, knowing the beatings when I'm feeling sad. I simply remember all these kinds of things, and then I don't feel so bad. So bad.
Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, then neither persons nor property will be safe. 15 years ago, when I realized that someone had chosen me to be their mother, I did not have any dreams of one day being chosen to mother any children. I had no desire to do that. And I realized that someone had chosen me, that my son in some way, in some space, decided that I was going to be the one to mother him. And since my life was going to be interrupted, I decided that I was going to call myself a Black mommy activist. And I was going to raise my sons as soldiers in this fight to bring about justice. When my youngest son joined my oldest son, I realized I was outnumbered. And I realized I had to protect them, and I had to prepare them in ways that I thought we were just playing at justice. We were playing at freedom. We did not have a television, so we would do things like have mock practice trials in the backyard and sit-in movements in the basement. But it was a way of trying to make the movement real to them. I would plaster their walls with pictures of people who looked like them, and I would tell them that one day their dream is to someday be on somebody else's wall. And I remember they would draw pictures of themselves and stick it up and say, "Mommy, I'm already on the wall," with this notion that they were aspiring to be more than what they were at that moment. I thought that we were just talking about my father's history. I thought I was helping them to understand the civil rights movement in a way that made it real to them. I did not know that I was preparing them for a life of activism. When Trayvon Martin was killed, when he was brutally murdered, I realized at that point my life was going to change. I had thought prior to that, my husband and I, that we could just educate our way out of situations. We could make enough money to move away from the hard neighborhoods. We could send our boys to private school and never have to think about race again, that they were going to be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Trayvon Martin happened, and for us who were on the fringes, it woke us up. It made us realize that in ways that we had protected them, our job was now to prepare them, that they were young soldiers in this battle, whether they wanted to be at war or not. They were born into black skin as males in this society, and that meant something, and they needed to be ready. And so we began to prepare ourselves to get ready for the battle that we knew was coming to Baltimore. I understand the city in which I live. I knew we just hadn't had our Trayvon Martin yet. We hadn't had our Mike Brown yet. My hope is that we could prevent it. My hope is that we could work hard enough to avoid that happening in our city. My sons would come home every day. They put a poster on the wall, and every day they would add new names to the poster. And they begin to ask me over and over again, "Mommy, when are we going to do something? Mommy is writing about it just enough. When are we going to fly to Ohio? When are we going to drive to Chicago? When are we going to go to South Carolina? When are we going to do what Granddaddy always talked about? Being willing to put your life on the line because you believe that change can happen." I did not know how to answer them. I kept thinking, well, if we just work hard enough and we just wait and have this thing play out, maybe I don't have to put my sons on the front line of a struggle. Maybe we can do enough on the back end. And then, of course, Freddie Gray happened in Baltimore City. And when my boys got in the car that day, they said, "Mommy, we took a vote of 2, mind you. We took a vote that we're going to go and march today, and we want you to take us." My boys then proceeded to write a phone number on their arm, a phone number they had been told to put there. So if you get arrested, you have a number that you can call. They began to pull out white T-shirts, and they were writing their name and their address on the white T-shirts. And they said, we were told to put this white T-shirt underneath our clothes. So if they have to identify our body, they'll know how to find you. So what mother can let a 15 and a 13-year-old boy get on the front lines and she's not willing to go? So I put the number on my arm as well, and I grabbed my white T-shirt with the idea that if they're going to go down, then we will go down as a family. And if the Whiteheads have to stand our ground, we will stand our ground together. This notion of trying to figure out what it means to be an activist, how you live that out in your life. The ways that I thought about it are the ways that Dr. King actually wrote about it. In 1853, a Unitarian minister and abolitionist Theodore Parker of Massachusetts, he said, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can only divine it by conscience, but from what I see, it bends toward justice. Dr. King said the same thing 112 years later in 1965. In a speech in Selma, Alabama, if you remember, they kept saying, Dr. King, how long, Dr. King? How long before change is going to come? He said, I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however difficult the hour, it will not be long because truth crushed to earth will rise again. They said, how long, Dr. King? How long before our voices rise up and they are heard? He said, not long, because no lie can live forever. The kids asked him, well, Dr. King, what does that mean? How long, sir? How long will it really take? He said, not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I have come to believe that justice has taken a long time to get here. That this arc that he talked about is still bending. And even though Dr. King said the universe is on the side of justice, I am not sure that we're all on the same side of the universe. Because it seems like we're living out different realities in this experiment called life. So as we prepared ourselves, I told my boys that you have to think of it, and I use this example a lot, like Franz Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. That there's a revolution that's been happening long before you got here. The revolution that your ancestors were involved in. That's how we got free from that revolution. And that revolution continued with your grandfather from the civil rights movement. That revolution is how we got here. Now you're part of the next revolution. You are making history. You will remember these days. I look forward to sitting with your kids and laughing about how their daddy worked for freedom. Laughing about how daddy stood up for justice. I said to do that, then we have to make a commitment to stay alive. We have to find a way to get out together and to come in together. I told my sons that there's this thing that we like to talk about, this minute called the courage minute, when you have to make the decision to go forward. In my family, we talk about courage a lot. It works for my boys. We would put it up on their walls. Are you courageous enough to say what needs to be said? And I had them spelling out the word courage and thinking about that. So when something happened at school, do you have the courage to speak and the words to say? Are you able to do that in that moment? And I realized that when my oldest son was 6 years old. He was running on the playground in his play school, and they had a game. The game was called Let's Get the Black Boy. And my son said at that moment, since he was the only black boy, he just started running, with the notion that he didn't know what they were going to do if they caught him. So are you courageous enough to speak, and do you have the words to say? Have you trained yourself to be race brave, and what does that look like in your life? In our home, we talk about courage being able to bless yourself. Do you have the ability to bless yourself? Let me tell you how we talk about that at home. My youngest son is 13. When he was 4, he was playing upstairs in his room. And anyone who has children, you love when kids can play by themselves, right? You can think for a moment while they're playing. So he's upstairs playing, and I'm listening with one ear to make sure he's okay. And I heard him sneeze. And then a second later, he yells out, God bless you, Amir. And so I bring him downstairs. And I said, well, Amir, you were by yourself. Why did you yell out, God bless you, Amir? He said, Mommy, sometimes when you're by yourself, you got to bless yourself. I was like, you do. Sometimes when you're by yourself, you've got to bless yourself. That people may not see the end with you, but you've got to be able to bless yourself. You've got to believe that there's something better on the other side. You've got to believe that you're fighting for justice every step along the way. You've got to be able to bless yourself. So when we were planning to go down and march for Freddie Gray, I heard my boys in the room going, Kofi, God bless you, Kofi. Amir, God bless you, Amir. And then they started saying names. God bless you, Tamir. Your life will not be in vain. And God bless you, Rakia. Your life will not be in vain. And God bless you, Freddie. We saw you. God bless you, Mike Brown. Your life will not be in vain. They said, we're going out to be blessed by all of them, Mommy. We're standing up for those who were unable to stand up for themselves. Having the courage to bless yourself. As we move through, I then talked to them about what it means to be spoon-fed history. I am a child of the civil rights movement. My dad was very active in the Jim Crow South. And I was spoon-fed the movement along with my peas and corns. You know, pass the biscuits, Daddy, and tell me about when you got arrested. And what was it like to march with King, Daddy, and give me the string beans, please? Because this notion that we were talking about the civil rights movement like it happened at the kitchen table. Yeah. So it became real to us. And my father then says, well, you have to learn how to have grit. And this grit is a quality that is hard to explain. It means that you have to be able to not bend your back even though they want you to bend it, even though they want you to bow down, even though they want you to give way, even though they want you to be small. You have to have grit that goes through you because you have to understand that you're standing on the shoulders of everyone who looks like you who has come before you. You are not standing by yourself. Look to your left and look to your right. If I am not with you, the spirit of who I am is with you. So he said, you've got to have grit. So I taught my boys, one, you got to have that courage and be able to bless yourself. Two, you have to have that grit where you're not going to bend your back because you believe there's something better on the other side. So as they spent time marching and singing and preaching and praying and sacrificing and struggling, we were then working towards trying to make something better. That third tool that my father talked to me about, because we have courage and we have grit, is about talent. Talent is a hard one because I know when I was younger, I couldn't figure out exactly what my talent was. I thought my talent was singing. I soon found out it was not. But soon found out. It was very clear that that was not my talent. But my father used to say, you were sent here on a mission. There is something that you can do that nobody else can do but you. You were chosen for such a time as this. What is it that you can do? Why are you here? What mission are you supposed to be on? He said you should get up to the pearly gates and you should be able to say, everything you sent me to do, I did it. I spoke out against injustice. I spoke out against inequality. I spoke out against racism. I spoke out against class. I gave my seat up when somebody needed. I took my shoes off when they needed. I did exactly what you sent me there to do, to be a beacon of light and hope in this very dark world at this moment. So having that talent and recognizing that in you and then having the courage and the grit. So that's three of the things that my father sent me off to college with. He said he didn't have a lot to give me. He said, I have nothing to give you but $50 and a box of Tide. He said, but if you look in your suitcase, there's a box in there. He said, when you open the box, it's going to look empty. I said, well, it's an empty box, Daddy. Why are you giving me an empty box? He said, that box is filled with all the tears your mother and I shed to get you to this place. So every time you think you can't make it, every time you think you're alone, take out those boxes of tears. That's how we got you this far. We prayed and cried and made it through. And there would be times when I would call my father and say, Daddy, once again, my tuition is due. And he would say, well, I don't have any money. He said, but hold on for a second. I know someone I can call on. My dad is a Baptist minister. He said, you just want to put the phone down for a second because I know someone I can call on. And when I call on him, don't worry, the tuition will be there. Your job is to study. My job is to make sure you can stay there. So that notion of finding what it is you're supposed to do and believing in something more than yourself is that thing that he sent us off to college with. That fourth and final piece that my father gave me was opportunity. He said that doors will be open. College for him was the 13th grade. That I was taught early on that I was being prepared to go forward. That high school was not the end for me. He said no one ever got a prize for just attending college. He said you have to finish. He said that is the job and that is the goal of everyone. We want you to finish. I think about that because when I was working on my PhD, in 2.5 years, as Ann told you, I had my 2 boys at the same time. So I'm juggling raising boys and being a wife with being a student at the same time. I would go to baseball games and I'm saying, Mommy's going to write her dissertation. Call me when you're at bat and I'll make sure I look up. I said, because I've got to get this thing done. I said, because when Mommy graduates, we all graduate. We're doing this thing together. Well, at my graduation, the president of UMBC, Freeman Rabowski, would call people to stand up. So he said, Karsonya Whitehead, where are you? Stand up. She came to us as a teacher. She's leaving as a professor. We salute you, Karsonya. Well, I look over and my boys are standing up too. And I asked them later, I said, well, when Mommy stood up, why did you stand up? And they said, Mommy, you said we're doing this together. So when you stood up, we stood up. I said, well, that makes sense because one day when you get your BA or your MA or your JD or your MD, you look to your right because your father and I will be standing up with you because when you get through, we get through that thing with you. So the notion of having opportunity so you can work things out. And finally, and this is one that my father never taught me, but one I picked up from his life, is you've got to have faith. This notion of having courage and having that opportunity and having your talent and having your grit, none of that in my life means nothing if you don't have faith. And I couldn't understand what faith meant when I was a child. I couldn't really put my hands on it. Faith is not something you can see. I mean, the Bible talks about having this idea of something you can't even put your hands on, right? You have to believe in something that you can't see. My father would then say faith is about stepping off into darkness. He said, and that's believing that God will give you something strong to stand on, or he will teach you how to fly. Yeah. So faith is being able to jump, finding that courage within yourself to step out, knowing that you're going to be taught something. You will make it in the ways that you have to go. And as he prepared me and sent me out, he said I was supposed to be like David. He said, because David ran to meet the giant Goliath. He said, there are giants that you're going to meet. Giants who will tell you that you are nothing. Giants who will try to remind you of who you used to be. Giants who will try to tear you down in every way, shape, or form. You have to run and meet your giants, confident that you have the tools to take them down. And that is how I used to believe I would get through. I need to have the ability to take down the giants. I believe this, and I was hoping that I would get this through to my boys. When we spent our time marching every day, I said, my job out here is to help spark your genius. Because this notion that Carter G. Woodson said is that we have to spark the genius in young people and turn them into scientists and doctors and activists. How do we spark that genius? For my boys, it was when Freddie Gray died. For them, they could no longer sit back and be comfortable. When genius is sparked, mountains begin to move. The way I understand it, and Elridge Cleaver said it best, at the funeral for Rosa Parks, he said that when Rosa Parks chose not to get up, that a gear somewhere shifted in the universe. And life would never be the same again. He said, every time you make a decision, a gear shifts somewhere. So when my boys chose to go out and march for Freddie Gray, a gear shifted for them. Life as they knew it would never be the same. So even though I had read about the revolution, I had thought about the revolution, I figured that I was actually living the revolution at that moment. We marched for 10 days straight for Freddie Gray, marching in and around his neighborhood. I realized what King really meant when he said that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, that we are tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. That though we were marching for Freddie Gray, we were really marching to bear witness to injustice. They're really marching to really live out what Dr. King wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail, knowing that all of our stories are connected, all of our lives are tied together. So the suffering in Baltimore is tied to the suffering in Syria. And the struggle to free incarcerated Nobel Peace Prize winners in China is just as important as the struggle to free Mumia. And the images of college students being pepper sprayed in Ferguson are just as important and significant as the images of women being sprayed with tear gas in Turkey. Injustice anywhere, whether in Florida or Baltimore, Turkey, South Carolina, Sudan, or Sandy Hook. It's a threat to justice everywhere. A statement that is as true today as it was when Dr. King wrote it. When my father went to march at the March on Washington, and that is in nowhere similar to our march around Baltimore, he said that he was in the military at this moment in Washington, D.C. He said he heard about the March on Washington and he wanted to leave to be a part of the march. The military decided that on Saturday, the day of the march, they were going to close the base and nobody could leave. So him and his friend left on Friday night. He said, there's no way that I can miss being a part of history. I knew that something special was going to happen, and I had to be there. I had to be ready because change was on the way, and he felt that he was a part of this change. That's how I felt when I was out marching for Freddie Gray. I did not know what change would look like. I did not know what form it would take. I knew something was changing, even if it was only changing in me. Even if it was only forcing me to come out of my bubble and say, I can no longer protect my boys. I must prepare them to be the soldiers that I've trained them to be. We have been working for freedom all of our lives. And when it gets here, I want to be ready, and I want my sons to be ready. I want them to continue to bend this moral arc of justice because we have been pushing it towards the end. We have to be ready when that comes. So I believe that there are two things that help us to spark genius. The first is that we have to learn to recognize the truth. Now, there are many versions of the truth, and once you accept one, I believe you have to pick it up and you have to taste it and hold it and feel it, and you have to realize that this truth that you have crafted, it may not be the absolute truth. It may not be the only truth, but that is the truth that you are accepting, and be willing at some point to say, this truth that I have, it's not the correct one. I'm going to lay it down and pick up something else. So be willing to forgive yourself when you make the wrong decisions. Be willing to get back up when you fall, because you're going to fall a lot. I might be the only one among you who is a sinner and who falls a lot, but I fall all the time. But my father says when you fall on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. And so that is what I continue to do, to fall on my back, look up, and get back up again, and get moving on this path I have. Next, I believe you have to learn how to see beyond your current situation. When I asked my father what this meant and how to do that, he told me about a story of a man who wanted to build a boat. He wanted to build a boat in a time when boats hadn't been built before. He took his men down to the water and said, help me to build a boat. You need to put the pieces together, work with me to do that. And he couldn't get the men motivated to work. So he told his wife, they won't help me build the boat. What's the problem? She said, tomorrow when you take them to the water, have them take their shoes off and have them feel the sand. And then have them step out and feel the coolness of the water. Then have them bend down and put their fingers in the water. Have them close their eyes and smell the salt. Have them open it and watch the moon rise off the water. If you do that, they will build the boat on their own, because everybody wants to go beyond what the eye can see. We shouldn't have to tell you how to build the boat. We give you the tools and then birth that seed in you to want to go beyond what the eye can see. There's a place, I really believe, a place that exists beyond our current reality, beyond our unfulfilled dreams and broken promises, beyond poverty and crime and illiteracy and abuse, a place that exists at this moment only in our minds. But it's a place that we get to by sparking genius, by shifting gears and changing the current narrative. We must work together to spark the genius in our young people. At the same time, we are re-sparking the genius in ourselves. As long as you are here, no matter your age, there's still work to be done, because you have been sustained for such a time as this. So Notre Dame family, I challenge you today to see beyond what your eyes can see, to see to that place where in time the moral arc has stopped bending and justice and equality are the norm. I challenge you today in the spirit of peace and equality and justice and a world where all lives can matter and all people can be free and all voices can be heard, that as we collectively push towards the mark of the high calling, I challenge you to reach back and grab another hand and pull them along with you, because I believe that we can get there. We just have to get there together. Thank you. So they had asked me to open it up for some questions and answers and possible discussion. So I do open the floor up if people do have a question or a comment.
Thank you so much for that wonderful address, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about something you mentioned yesterday, namely that after the many years of Kroc award or degree programs, that you are the third or maybe the fourth African American to have graduated from this program?
The first African American to attend the program.
Okay.
Yes.
And you were consulted on ideas about how to recruit additional students. So I thought you might share some of your ideas with the audience.
So when I arrived in 1992, the world was obviously a very different place, but the Peace Institute was also very different. I was encouraged to come here because they talked about living in a house with 14 students from around the world. They talked about building peace, and it seems to be, to me, it was a haven away from Washington, D.C. My father says I was on the run. I think I was trying to find myself, and I thought perhaps a peace program could help me get there. Over the years, they have not been very successful for a variety of reasons in trying to entice and bring African Americans into a peace program. Some of the ways that I outline they should do that is to go where the African American students are. Go to the HBCUs, the historical black colleges and universities. Go and do recruitment work there. Go to the conferences when you have master's and doctoral students of color who meet every single year for the Southern Regional Educational Board. And then use the alumni to reach out and tap into this. I know that there are a lot of changes now. We're coming under global studies, which is going to be very exciting for the program. But finding ways to reach into those networks to get more students of color to come. I think the program is very important. I think we're at a point now where we're talking about peace, and we're really trying to think about what peace looks like in real-world application, outside of the classroom, inside the classroom, and in our own lives. And I think that working alongside the Kroc Institute, which I'm more than happy to do, that we'll be able to bring more African American students into the program and then begin to kind of infiltrate these circles with the notions of peace. Yes, ma'am, and then sir.
Hi, thank you. I know that you cross disciplines in many ways, working in education, working in peace studies, and I'm curious how it is that you encourage or engender this idea of activism in our educators in the United States. I think it's a hard place for them to get to and to be given the current climate. So what do you do and how do you help that?
Okay, so I do cross a lot of disciplines. I tend to consider myself to be transdisciplinary, which means I both cross over disciplines and then reach beyond disciplines. So my work is in history and communication and in education and in media. I do work in theology and in philosophy. And I do summer teacher institutes for teachers around the country where I work with K-12 teachers in how to create lesson plans and become culturally responsive educators. I believe in turning the classroom into a place of active activism, that teachers have that unique ability to help spark curiosity and genius in young people. Sometimes they lack the resources to do that. So I have written both curricula and lesson plans. I've gathered the resources, and I've written books about them. And I make those available to teachers through grants through the Kellogg Institute, where teachers are able to get this in their homes. I've also created webisodes using interviews by African-American visionaries over the age of 65, using music and text to reach our young people. So I do help to set teachers on fire, because sometimes as a teacher, it does get really hard. And what you need to know is a new way of giving the old information. And the job I do is to make sure that's available to them. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh.
When I grow up, I want to be like you.
Oh.
Amen. I am a black pastor here in town. I'm wondering, how did you integrate your cultural and religious experiences from home with the philosophical and the readings and the work that you've done and did here at Notre Dame? How did you combine and integrate and work those things together?
That's a very good question. I answer kind of the way my father taught me, that I am unashamedly black and unapologetically Christian. That is how I live my life. And from those two spaces where I start, then I begin to build on top of that. That this notion of peace is not outside of who I am. It's a part of how I want to live my life. Peace is this notion that to me goes beyond being able to have conversations, but also being able to find joy in the moments where conflict doesn't exist. So I did not have to integrate anything new. I just had to learn all of the readings and all of the work on top of what I already believed. I followed very closely the work of Dr. King, and even though in so many ways I am not a nonviolent activist, it's very hard for me to do that, particularly when we were out marching for Freddie Gray. I had hoped if someone had attacked me, I had hoped that I could respond like my father and turn the other cheek, and I found that I am not that person. I found that it might have been easy for me to turn the other cheek if it were me, but I could not turn the other cheek when people put their hands on my boys. So I believe I'm still a peace activist, just a peace activist who knows how to push back, because sometimes being dragged along is not enough for me. Yeah.
Thank you again. You used the word post-racial. I want you to problematize that a little bit, because I thought that was jarring for me a little bit.
Yes. In my book, Letters to My Black Sons, Raising Boys in a Post-Racial America, the word post-racial has a little question mark stuck in there, because there was this notion that once we elected President Obama in 2008, we were post-racial, that race was not an issue. We were judging people by more than the color of their skin. And unfortunately, it seems like with the election of President Obama, all it did was pull off the Band-Aid to show how equally and clearly divided we are as a nation. So I use post-racial tongue-in-cheek, because that's the word that was used by the media, saying, why should you complain? You have a black president. You should be quite happy. I don't understand why you people are upset, because you have President Obama. Don't worry about us killing you in the streets. Don't worry about what's happening in the schools. Don't worry that you don't have food to eat or shoes on your feet. It's okay because you have President Obama, and that means we're post-racial. So for me, it was tongue-in-cheek, saying that is not the world that we live in, nor in the short term, it's the world that we're trying to create. We're talking about equal application under the law. I don't even know what post-racial is, and whether or not we can get to a point where people don't see the color of their skin. I don't want you to not see the color of my skin. See it and recognize it and just respect it is what I'm asking you to do. I don't want you to not see color. And I've had people say to me, no, I never see color. I'm like, then show me your doctor's note to show that you are actually colorblind. Because if you are not actually verifiably or medically colorblind, then you see my skin color. What you really are trying to say is you're not judging me based upon that. Well, that's a different conversation we have to have, because what does judgment really look like? And what does it mean to be socially constructed in this American society to see black people a certain way? Just like you fail the Harvard implicit test, I do as well, because I've been socially constructed in this country, and it's something I have to fight against as well. So it's tongue-in-cheek.
Hi, that was amazing. Thank
thank
you.
you.
I actually wanted to ask you about a line of your poem.
Okay.
You use the line when life is settling into the familiar. And I think that that's such a hard place. You mentioned, you march for 10 days and then there's the 11th day
Yes.
and there's not a march. So maybe if you would have any thoughts on how do we continuously unsettle ourselves from the familiar?
And we have tried to do that in Baltimore where Tyrone West, who was killed before Freddie Gray, his family protests every Wednesday. They call them West Wednesday. And they've been protesting for 188 Wednesdays in a row. So every single Wednesday there is a protest, usually a candlelight vigil. We also go into the school systems and we do K-12 activism. On days when students are out of school, we do a freedom school where students can come and they can learn about the history they're not learning in school, which is a history about people who look like them, and we spend time doing that. We have set up something similar to the Highlander School, which is this notion of training young people in how to be activists. So we're trying to get through the 11th day. I'm finding, though, that the 11th day has lasted for almost a year. Like, we've been on day 11 for a year. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen in Baltimore City as we move closer to April, when we really start to recognize and think about what has happened in the last year. We've worked in Freddie Gray's neighborhood because Freddie Gray's neighborhood is a food desert. And once the CVS was burned down, people couldn't get their medication. So we've set up kind of food runs to bring groceries in. We've set up medicine runs to go and get medications. We've tried to change as much as we can, knowing that when we are dealing with systemic inequality, the system has to step in at some point and begin to dismantle these things. It's not just enough to bring food into a community, because at some point we're going to hit day 12, right? And on day 12, I'm not going to be able to go at 4 o'clock and take groceries. What happens then when there's no grocery store in this community? And so we're all kind of afraid, I think, maybe we in terms of just me and my boys, but we're all afraid about day 12. Like, what happens when people's lives get back to normal? What then happens in communities where Freddie Gray lived his life? So we're concerned, and we're trying to set up things in place to make sure that day 12 continues what day 11 is already doing.
Thank you, Karsonya, and congratulations for a well-deserved award. And thank you for all you do in that wonderful presentation. I wanted to ask about your interpretation of the civil rights movement and your wonderful provocative title of your talk here. You've referred a lot to the movement and to Dr. King, but what do you think would be the major strategic lessons from the civil rights movement, principles that were applied to achieve some of the successes that are relevant to our movements today and that should be more applied maybe in the streets?
Okay, thank you. There's been a lot of questions when we do kind of the training around young people saying, well, this is not your father's movement, that Black Lives Matter is completely different from the civil rights movement. In some ways, there are a lot of similarities and differences. The ways in which it's similar is that there is some policy work in place, that when you look at the civil rights movement, it was about the equal application of the law, breaking the back of Jim Crow. That in Black Lives Matter is talking about equal application of the law when it comes to dealing with people who are assumed to be guilty, even though before they've been tried and convicted. So asking the government to step back and reapply this situation and reorganize what they're doing towards Black men and Black women in the inner city. Some of the ways the civil rights movement was different is that you did have leaders that you can point to. Well, I think that was both a weakness and a strength, right? So you had your Dr. King, you had your John Lewis, but you did not talk about your Bayard Rustin, right? You did not talk about your Diane Nash. And then there was the assumption that if you kill Dr. King, if you kill Malcolm X, if you kill Medgar Evers, in a sense you could kill the movement by killing those people. Well, Black Lives Matter is leader full rather than leaderless, right? So this notion that it's community-based and they're leaders of their own communities about what is happening there. In '63, in his speech at the March on Washington, Dr. King did challenge people. He said, go back home and do the work in your own community. I see that with Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter Baltimore is dealing with issues that are happening in our city, which is different than Black Lives Matter South Bend, and that they're all happening at the same time. Some of the other strategies that work, when I used my title from the civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter, what I was really talking about was being bookended by Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin. that for my father's generation, Emmett Till was their Trayvon Martin. That Emmett Till's mother chose to put the cover of that picture of his bloated and disfigured face on the cover of Jet magazine to shock the world. Trayvon Martin and the Twitter hashtag that came after that put those images, not necessarily Trayvon Martin, but the images of what happened to his body, the images of Mike Brown, what happened to his body, the images of Tamir Rice being shot, to put that out on social media to shock the world. So that strategy of making the world uncomfortable is something that Dr. King said when he was in prison in '63, when they talked to him about whether or not they should allow kids to be on the front line. That was a big discussion. It was in Birmingham. King had been arrested. Dick Gregory, when he arrived, he said he landed at the airport. They arrested him at the airport. But that the decision was made, we need to put kids on the front line because maybe that will shock the world. Well, if you look at Black Lives Matter, who's in the front of Black Lives Matter? Everybody from 4-year-olds to college students. This notion that it is shocking for people, it is unsettling for people. And I think one of the ways in which Black Lives Matter is different from the civil rights movement is that Black Lives Matter seems to be very intergenerational. That, one of the things with Birmingham, young people went out. Why? Because their mothers and fathers didn't want to not go to work, right? They're like, we cannot risk our jobs. But as you saw in the video, you had grandmothers and young people out fighting at the same time. I want to see the long term, and I think that it is hard in big ways to compare the two. I mean, even though I just tried, right? And the reason is that some people argue that the civil rights movement started around 1948. Because Brown v. Board was in '54, and the cases had to make their way up before you had this bundling of the Brown cases. And it really went, for some, until '72, until the Colored People's March in Washington, D.C., right? When you lay down after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and maybe we can begin to kind of dismantle these branches. Well, it's been 2.5 years with Black Lives Matter. I mean, it really started after Trayvon Martin and the ruling around George Zimmerman. We're trying to actually research and judge a movement that's less than 3 years old. And so people are passing these huge sweeping judgments. Oh, it's a failure. Why aren't you guys doing this? And it's 2.5 years. When has this country ever changed anything in 2.5 years? So even though I just compared it, it really is an unfair comparison. I would like to see what happens in the long haul with Black Lives Matter. I was surprised it lasted through the winter. Like I said, in so many ways, I wrote op-eds that I've, of course, been blasted about saying, can Black Lives Matter last through the winter? In other words, the winter of our discontent. When we go back to school, when we reach day 11, can we sustain this energy? And it is being sustained by young people. So I think we should give it a few more years to see what Black Lives Matter is going to eventually look like. I mean, the 3 Black queer women that started Black Lives Matter, well, they now have a 9-point plan for what Black Lives Matter should do. Well, I think it's too late because Black Lives Matter is now so organic that you have a march in South Bend and they call themselves Black Lives Matter. And it doesn't mean that they're not. It just means in ways like the civil rights movement was very controlled and contained, Black Lives Matter is a lot more organic. So will Black Lives Matter be successful in the long run? One of the goals for BLM was to raise awareness, was to raise consciousness. So Black Lives Matter went from a hashtag to being talked about at the UN. I think they've done a good job of raising awareness, of raising consciousness. When you have Tibetan monks holding a Black Lives Matter sign, when you have Egyptians running in the streets going, Black Lives Matter too, well, I'm thinking you are successful if you're trying to raise consciousness. Now, whether or not that consciousness transfers into policy change, well, there are conversations happening, so we have to see what the long-term effect is going to be. I mean, the fact that Hillary spoke to Black Lives Matter, even though she got into a huge argument with them, which they should have challenged her. Bernie Sanders met with Black Lives Matter. The only person who hasn't met with Black Lives Matter, of course, is Donald Trump, which is, he's the only one, which is fine because when he spoke, they held up, Claudia Rankin Citizen. So he didn't meet with Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter was in the audience. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful talk and congratulations on your award again.
Thank you.
We actually have a question from one of our colleagues Skyping in from Qatar.
Oh, wow, Skyping in.
He was unable to make it here.
Oh, I can only imagine, right?
But he had a few questions. I'll just try to ask one or two of them to synthesize what he was trying to say. He's curious about what you think with kind of the regards to the lack of adequate response to the killings of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, and countless others, that tensions have been building within the nation. And he's trying to see, what do you think will happen in response to that before there's peace? Will we have another Watts riot? Will we have another large uprising before peace can be acquired? Is conflict necessary before peace can be achieved? And then the second part of his question is...
Okay, let me take some notes. Hold on.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. I'm ready.
Second part of his question is that, like, looking in regards to 60s and 70s Black Power, Black Panther movement, should we be encouraging Black people to arm themselves and to meet force with force?
Okay.
Or should we be, again, extending the other cheek, or turning the other cheek, like you said, that you weren't quite a fan of necessarily?
Okay. First, thank you for Skyping in from Qatar. I do appreciate that. And you asked a number of questions about tensions that are building across the nation. I do believe that tensions are building. We see it happening. I think what is concerning to some of us, not all of us, what is concerning to some of us is the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that seems to be pervasive among some of the younger Black Lives Matter activists. I speak about the Black Lives Matter activist who killed himself on the steps of City Hall in Ohio, this notion that my demons won out today, that there's nothing we can do to change the system, so the only way we can change it is to remove ourselves from it. Well, that's a big concern, because that, to me, just signifies that there is a lack of hope. That's another way the civil rights movement and Black Lives Matter is different, because the civil rights movement, the church was an organizing force. You had a lot of pastors actively involved, using time to pray, talk about something bigger than yourself. They didn't say you had to be Christian to be a part of it, but this notion that there's something a little bit bigger than us, and that even if there's a promised land that we want to get to, you may not get there. But your job is to push us a little bit closer to that. So tensions are very high. We are pushing this rock up this hill, but I'm trying to encourage young people, as well as I keep encouraging myself, to keep moving forward, to keep fighting against this. I gave a great example, whoever I was talking to. I think I've talked to so many people, Ann. But this quote that I know Harriet Tubman didn't say, but I love the fact that people think she said it. But, she said that there's this giant that she's working against, and she was talking about the giant of slavery, and that she's a mosquito, and that even though a mosquito won't take a giant down, you can bite it on his hand and piss it off, right? So that for her job was just to make the giant uncomfortable. So even if we don't knock down this giant of racism, we can make the giant uncomfortable. We can interrupt lunch, we can interrupt Black Thursday, we can interrupt shopping for Christmas, we can interrupt you getting into the subway. Like, we can disrupt what you want to be a peaceful situation. That if we can't be safe in this society, then people should not be able to continue on with their everyday lives. And you may have to be inconvenienced. You may have to have an hour out of your schedule going home because people are standing in the street. That may happen. But if it means we can get another 12-year-old boy home safe from the park, then I'm willing to stand there, and people should be willing to be disrupted. Second, you had said, this notion of 60s and 70s Black power, should Black people arm themselves and fight force with force? Well, are you able to click my slides? All the way to the fourth one? Because I just happen to have an answer right here. Yes, can you do that? Keep going, next one. There you go. That's what I believe. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Tell your friend from Qatar, he did the right thing. I was waiting for that question. Should we fight force with force? That's an individual question. I have decided to stick with love. I've decided to meet incredible bias and incredible hate with love, because I believe if I meet it with hate, then that hate begins to consume me and my demons will win out. That what allows me to go to sleep at night is the idea that I'm sticking with love, because hate is too great a burden to bear. And if it's the love for my boys that I go with, the love for my husband, the love for this dream of a better world, that is what I stick with. Because if I arm myself, then all I'm thinking about who's going to get in my way so I can do that. That is not the choice that I'm making. So should people arm themselves? I think it's an individual choice. It's just not a choice that I have made, because I'm sticking with this one here. All right, so I think if it's okay with Ann, I'd like to wrap up with a poem. And this poem is from my new book called Race Brave. And this is where I'll end it. It's called What Happens When the Lights Go Out. And now, like Ferguson, like New York, like South Carolina, Baltimore has become some type of place where some cops, white or black or brown, male or female, masquerade as judge, juror, executioner, where we find ourselves with questions and no answers, in mourning but without tears, in jungles concrete, no glass, in prisons controlled, guarded, no bars, in hell our sins judged by sinners, dripping blood from their teeth, tearing our hearts straight from out of our chest. We must remember that only the wicked see black skin as a sign of guilt, mistake guns for tasers, running as a sign of guilt, wallets for loaded weapons, see toy guns as real. They never hear our shouts for help as real. They can't believe that we can't breathe, that we want to be free, that we want to grow up. They can't accept that we belong here too, that it is our blood that runs thick with the same soil where we grow our food, our pain being used to feed a nation again. Our young brothers, now ageless and faceless, martyrs really, did not die, did not pass away. They are not lost. They were killed, murdered, shot, choked, spines snapped, necks broken. They are not lost because we know exactly where they are. Thank you.
Please join us for a reception, and we'll have a book signing also. Of Karsonia's books will be available out in the Great Hall outside. Thank you very much for coming.